Hello and welcome to your next flipped classroom video. This time we're going to be looking at a case study, which is an ecotourism case study, which is based on Basecamp Kenya. Okay, and there you can see a nice little picture of Mr. Birch, your classic eco-tourist. Now what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to watch this video. You're going to need to remember that you can pause it, stop it, rewind it, go on the internet and find out more at any point you like. But it is essential that you get down all of the notes and all of the information that you are going to need from this video for the exam. Now, before we begin, what I want to do is to introduce you to our target, okay? Now, as always, our target is a question that we're going to be able to answer in an exam. The question that I want us to consider this time is as follows. Explain how we can minimise the effects of mass tourism. Now, you've already done case studies looking at certain issues to do with mass tourism, particularly centred around the social, economic and environmental impacts of tourism in Kenya. Okay, now we're going to look at how we can minimise them. Now, the question that I've put at the bottom there is, what do we need to know in order to answer the question? Okay, so what I want you to do now is I want you to read through that question very, very carefully again, and in your books I would like you to write down, based on what you can see there, what you think we need to know in order to answer the question. And I would like you to pause the video now so that you can go and do that. Okay, so by now you should have had a chance to say what you need to know in order to answer the question, okay? And hopefully you've got something along the lines of this. You need to have some understanding of the effects of mass tourism in order to understand how you can influence it or how you can minimise them. Now, I've put a big tick next to this, and the reason why I put a big tick next to this is because you've shown me in previous lessons that you understand what the social, economic and environmental impacts are of tourism on Kenya. Firstly, if we can look at the ways that we can minimise ecotourism, we need to define what ecotourism is, and then what we need to do is we need to be able to explain how these problems have been minimised using ecotourism. And because it's an explain, we're going to link it into our 7-mark question, which obviously means that we need to require a case study in order to hit that top level 3 on the mark scheme, okay? And this is where your Basecamp Kenya comes into what we're going to be looking at. So this flipped classroom lesson essentially has 3 objectives, okay? And the learning objectives are as follows, and I want you to write these down into your books. Firstly, we need to be able to define what ecotourism means. Secondly, we need to look at how ecotourism can be achieved, and we're going to do that through our Basecamp Kenya case study. And finally, you're going to need to evaluate how effective it is. Now, I've put grade levels by these because your simple definitions are your short answer questions that will get you up to that grade C. We need to be hitting higher than that, and we need to be hitting the B's, the A's and the A stars. That final objective that's down there, which says evaluate its effectiveness, that we're going to do back in the classroom when we start to look at our exam skills and look at some of the different things that we need to answer in relation to this case study, okay? So, the first learning objective then is to be able to define what ecotourism is. Now, if you look down here, you'll see that I've got a Venn diagram. Now, that Venn diagram has got 3 elements to it. It's got the social, it's got the economic, it's got the environmental. Okay? Now, you'll remember, rightly, that in Kenya, there were social impacts, such as, for example, people in Mombasa not adhering to local Muslim customs and traditions. We've got environmental impacts, such as the scaring of animals by hot air balloons, or it could be footpath erosion from people going on safari and going off trail. Okay, we've also got economic issues that perhaps maybe tourism is not sustainable, and if it's not sustainable and tourists leave, then that leaves you with a negative multiplier effect. So I can conclude from that Kenya is not sustainable, okay, in terms of mass tourism. And it's not sustainable because it's not good equally, although there are benefits, but it's not equally good for the social, economic and the environmental things that we've started to look at. Now, for something to be truly sustainable and to be able to keep going on for future generations, it needs to sit in the middle of that Venn diagram. So it needs to be good for society, it needs to be good for the economy, it needs to be good for the environment. And if it can satisfy all 3 of those, it therefore is sustainable. Now, that brings me to my definition of what ecotourism is. Now, you can go onto Google now and you can type it in and you can have a little look at what you think it might mean. Now, I've divided my Venn diagram up into 3 because I think that this is what ecotourism is, okay? And this is the definition that we're going to be working from. Ecotourism is responsible travel which conserves the environment and improves the well-being of local people, okay? That's absolutely crucial. therefore it's sustainable. It's good for the environment, it's good for society, so it improves the well-being of local people, and if it's providing for the well-being of local people, it's going to be providing people with jobs, so therefore it can be an economic benefit as well. Okay, now we get to our case study. Now we need to be able to provide a specific example of somewhere that is ecotourist friendly. Now our case study is an organisation which is called Basecamp Kenya. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some information about Basecamp Kenya, and you're going to need to get some bullet points down in your books to explain what it is that Basecamp Kenya does. Now firstly, it's a not-for-profit organisation, so it doesn't seek to make any money, it just seeks to cover its costs. It works together with local Maasai communities, okay, so the people of the Masai Mara Game Reserve, it works with them, and it promotes tourism that does not damage the environment and actually helps local communities, okay. So that's a bit of an outline as to what Basecamp Kenya is as an organisation and what they do. Now you could, if you wanted to, and I would strongly suggest that you do, pop onto Google now and have a little search of Basecamp Kenya to see what other information you can find out. Now that's all very well, but we need to look at what it does. So in other words, what does it do socially, economically and environmentally to be good and sustainable and a piece of ecotourism? Well, firstly, it limits the camps that people are camping in to 16 tents. It provides local people with jobs and gets them to make local Maasai furniture, keeping their cultures and traditions alive. They've set up treetop walkways so that you can observe the wildlife on foot and not observe them on the ground. And also they use lots of renewable energy such as solar cookers in order to make sure that they can power everything that they need. It also collects all the wastewater that it's got and reuses it. Remember, Kenya is a very dry and arid landscape, so obviously water conservation is really important. And they also use dry toilets which don't flush using water. Okay, and they've gone on an afforestation program where they have replanted 25,000 trees, restoring the natural vegetation of the area. Now obviously if it is sustainable, it needs to be good socially, economically and environmentally, okay? And what I've done is I've set us up a little table that looks like this: social, economic and environmental. Now what I want you to do is to draw this table into your books. I want you to rewind this video a little bit. I want you to look at some of the things that it does, and I want you to write them down into the categories that you've got: social, economic and environmental, and I want you to do that now, okay? So for example, I'll give you one example, the use of dry or waterless toilets, okay, that would be something that is environmentally sustainable because it's making sure that you can sustain resources. Okay, go away and do that now. Okay, now that you've done that, what we need to do is we need to start thinking about our exam skills. Now you know that you need to be using connectives as much as possible in an exam in order to explain the obvious. Remember, the examiner knows nothing about geography. It's up to you to explain the geography to them. So what I want you to do is use a range of connectives, your therefores, your this means that, okay, in order to make sure that you can explain the obvious. So that when you go into an exam, you're developing your answers. You're not just writing waterless toilets, okay, or dry toilets. I want you to explain why, using connectives, that is good either socially, economically and environmentally. And what I would like you to do now is to pick at least 2 of those, and I would like you to explain them next to it in your table, but I want you to do this in your book, okay? So use connectives to explain the obvious. Get yourselves off and get that done now. Okay. Now, this was our target question. Explain how we minimise the effects of mass tourism, and it's a 7-mark question. Now, you'll probably be quite pleased to hear I'm not going to make you do this question, okay? What I'm going to make you do is something slightly different, and we will be doing this question later on in class, but I want you to imagine that you are the examiner that's setting these questions. So you've got the question that you've decided you want to set, explain how we minimise the effects of mass tourism. But what I want you to do is I want you to write me a mark scheme for that question, okay? So, what would be a level 1 answer? Can you give some rough ideas and some examples? What would be a level 2 answer and what would be a level 3 answer? Go away and write that mark scheme now so that we can use it for peer assessment when we get back into lessons. Okay? And finally, if you do all of those things and you include all that level 3 information, then you're going to get top marks when it comes to an exam. So there we've got a picture of a smiley, happy lion, and you will be as happy and as smiley as this lion when you get 7 out of 7 on this exam question.